all of my life in every season. Awesome. Somebody go ring a cowbell or something. Go drive some people in here. Yeah. Hi, guys. How's it going? What do you think? Yeah, well, I'll tell you what's really cool for me. Yeah. So now maybe I'll look like I know what I'm doing during announcements. No promises. It's just maybe. I love being in our new space. I love it. We are already doing things here that were impossible at the old space, right? Which is fantastic. But I don't know if you could tell how kind of out of joint and like flustered I've been the last few weeks trying to do service. Get in the new space with my speakers and the thing, and like nothing's where it's supposed to be. You know what I mean? So we're settling in, we're making new rhythms and so forth. And these screens I think are going to help that quite a bit because oh my goodness, somebody left their bag on the front row. Can you believe that? I promise whoever that is, they're not reserving a seat there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's okay and healthy to mix it up every once in a while. All right, I guess we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, class. Good morning. Welcome back to Revelation chapter 31. No. We finished Revelation, which was pretty cool, right? And then we did Jonah. I don't know what your impressions of doing Jonah was. I enjoyed it, yeah. And then I just showed somebody this week where you can find the produced, pre-recorded study of Jonah that I did for our church back in 2020. It is on our YouTube, but we had an interactive experience, which was nice. Except Mike, who knew all the answers. Oh, yeah, he's up there, sure enough. So I'll lay out for you a short narrative about where my head's at for Bible study in the next stretch. So in the fall, I'm going to co-teach a class with Ken about, sharing the faith. Something that I think we all know is necessary, all know is important, and a lot of Lutherans just not real comfortable with. And, so we're going to kind of try to give you some tools and help with that. I don't want to do it over summer because I think we'll miss a lot of people who could benefit from it, because summers you're in and out a lot. So I've got a sort of undefined stretch of time to fill, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. And then as I was sitting down thinking about things I might teach about, I thought, rather than just trying to fit something to length, we're just going to start a study, and then when it's time to stop, we'll put a pin in it. And maybe we come back to it, and maybe we go on to something else. And so I thought, well, since we did Revelation real recently, maybe let's do Genesis. I kind of know some of the people in the room today, I think would probably have a particular interest in that. So we're going to study Genesis starting right on chapter 1, verse 1. Well, in some regard, we'll start even before that because we'll talk about the book before we study the book. You should know pretty much none of the books in the Bible had titles when they were written, right? These days, if you're going to publish a book, you got to have a title. It's really important to have a good title. And if you want to sell 1 million copies, the title has to fit the format, a blank of blank and blank. You do that, you'll sell 1 million copies guaranteed. Just pick any 3 nouns, right? A couch with springs and cushions. Like, boom, you're good to go. So the titles got named in retrospect. And for Exodus, that makes sense. It's the story of the Exodus, Exodus being a Greek word, ex meaning out, hodos meaning road or way. Exodus is their leaving Egypt. And some of them are, pretty straightforward. Kings. It's a book about kings. It's a history, right, of Israel. Genesis comes to us through the Greek. The Hebrew name for the book is pretty much equivalent in Hebrew. And what Genesis means is the beginning. And if I ask you the beginning of what, your impulse is probably going to be the beginning of everything. But if it was just a book about the creation story, it'd be a lot shorter, probably, or we'd get a different set of details. Because we get through creation in one chapter, and then we just tell it again in chapter 2 from a different angle. And then we move on from creation. So if you're thinking about the beginning, yes, it is the beginning of everything, but in particular, I think it's really the story of the beginning of God's people. Because what's going to happen is, once we get through the first 2 chapters, we're going to follow Adam and Eve and their lineage through Noah. And then Noah's lineage to Abraham. And a good chunk of the book is going to be about Abraham and his sons. And if you... we'll come back to this in many weeks, I'm sure. But if you aren't aware, when we think about Israel, right? God's people in the Bible often referred to as the children of Israel or the people of Israel. Israel was a name of a person. You probably know of him as Jacob. He was the grandson of Abraham. It was to Abraham in particular, this isn't the only time this promise comes, but to Abraham in particular, that God promised that he would make of him a great nation, and that through him all the world would be blessed. So the title Genesis wasn't written by the author of Genesis. And as a matter of fact, it is, as many of the hymns in the hymnal are named, it was named just after the first few words of the book, right? So in Hebrew, it'd be Bereshith, I think. But the short version is, in the beginning, that word, which in Hebrew is one word, became the name of the book. Make sense? So today, because we will be talking about creation in particular, there's already probably in your mind a lot of discussion from different parts of Christianity about how the world was made and came to be. So we will spend some of our focus today talking about the different ways people understand this story. What I'm going to do is do my best to give a fair representation of different positions. So I'm not going to try and straw man the things that I think are not right, and I'm not going to try and steel man the things that I wish were a more solid case. I'm just going to do my best to present different ideas. I will tell you, and maybe not every pastor, certainly not every Christian will agree with me on this. I will tell you that if we have a difference of opinion about how old the earth is, that's not going to prevent either of us from getting to heaven. Right? So I want to keep that kind of thing in mind. Is there any repercussions or implications about what position you choose. Maybe. Could be. And so that's kind of what we want to get into underneath it all. Sound good? The whole class is not going to be this kind of thing, but with this chapter in particular, we're going to spend some time on it, okay? So if you have your Bibles open, I encourage you to open to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In your Bible, it is probably not the first page. By the way, just for funsies, by show of hands, how many of y'all have a Luther's Small Catechism that you own? Cool. Yeah. If you don't, you should, and I will give you one. But the book that you have is probably about yay thick, right? You know how thick the catechism is? It's about that much. Because on the cover of your book, it probably says something like this: Luther's Small Catechism with explanation. And the catechism is this, and the explanation is that. Your Bible is probably full of that kind of stuff. They're study notes. They're meant to be helpful, and no shade on that. You probably have a table of contents in your Bible. And it's probably been a long time since you ever thought to look there. But, for somebody who's new to the Bible, that kind of thing can be helpful. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Let's take this slowly. What in the story has God created so far? Probably, yeah. Probably that's and he doesn't do it verbally, right? But we really have a hard time conceptualizing things apart from time, right? Even when I try to picture forever, I think about it as an endless procession of tomorrows moving forward, or I can think about it as an endless regression of yesterdays, right? But God isn't constrained in that way. So if you, whether it's Groundhog Day or Back to the Future or various episodes of Star Trek or whatever, our science fiction conception of time travel is almost always moving forward or backward along a linear thing, right? God doesn't have that kind of constraint. Every point in time is, if we can say it this way, every point in time is equidistant from God, right? Which is why, for God, prophecy is no problem. He's not looking backwards or forwards in time. He's sitting where he sits, and he's telling us what's over there. And God can exist when time isn't. So this becomes a cosmological problem for many people. It's well, where did God come from? Well, you're already thinking that there could be something before God. But that kind of thinking doesn't apply to God, because apart from God, there's no time, let alone space. Does that make sense? So, it's better, I think, to operate by saying, well, in the first place, God is a fact of reality. He doesn't have an origin. He's a fact. And that squares well with how God names himself. You remember when Moses is being instructed by God to go talk to Pharaoh at the burning bush, right? And Moses is like, well, I have an excuse. I have many excuses. And God gives him, answers to every one of his excuses. One of them was, well, if I go, who do I tell him sent me? And God responds, you can tell him that I am sent you. That's a weird name, right? Unless you think about it, the name implies I am and I always will be, right? That's kind of the grammar of it. But at a more fundamental level, it's like, well, he is the fact on which the whole universe hinges. Right? If God is not true, then nothing else is. So yeah, in the beginning, God created. It says God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the deep. And the Spirit of God hovered over the water, was hovering over the water, over the face of the waters. Okay, so already we get a slight, and as you read the Bible more, this becomes more obvious. But if you're just opening the Bible for the first time, you might not recognize that what you just saw there is our first introduction to the idea of a Trinity, right? God the Father is creating things, and he's depicted as sort of like aloof and outside of, working on the thing. And as we'll see here in a moment, he'll speak and it comes to be. So that's kind of how we visualize God. It's like outside of time and outside of creation. But then it says the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. So God is remote? No. He's remote and aloof and outside of it. And at the same time, the Spirit of God is right up in there. Hands-on, so to speak. Now, as I've probably taught you before, I will point to you again. The word in Greek for spirit and the word in Hebrew for spirit both function roughly in the same way, in the sense that they don't mean strictly spirit, as you might conceive of the word. It can mean breath or wind, sort of like air in motion. It's the thing that makes things move, right? Without it, animals don't move. But it also moves trees. It also moves waves. And so that's part of the picture here, right? Is that the Spirit of God, it's caressing the water, right? Or some translators will describe this as being the same verb that a chicken will do when she's brooding over her eggs, you know? All right, so we get Father and Spirit. Now, where did the waters come from? This is just presupposed that there's just waters there. As we continue through this story, I think it's really helpful to understand that the narrative that we receive is a narrative told to people by God, because the people weren't there to witness it. You understand what I'm saying? It's not like Moses or whomever wrote this book was an eyewitness to the creation, right? So the story received had to come from God. When God told the story to them, he told it in a way that they could grasp, right? Just like if a 3-year-old asks you how a car works, you may talk about gas. You will probably not talk about an internal combustion engine, right? You'll probably not talk about spark plugs. You will not talk about a catalytic converter, right? You may talk about the gas pedal and the brake pedal, right? You're unlikely to talk about a clutch. Is the story you tell the 2-year-old about the car true? Well, I hope so. I hope you tell them a true story. You will not be able to tell it to them at a completely, comprehensively accurate level because they don't have the capacity to take that in, okay? So keeping that in mind, as this story is being told to the first people ever, they did not have the same view of the cosmos that we do. They didn't understand that some of the shiny things in the sky are planets like ours, although there are no planets like ours. Neither of those are sensible, right? They had an ancient view of the world, right? Which is what you would intuit, that Earth is in the middle of everything and everything rotates around the Earth, right? And that's the way the story is told. Does that mean that the Earth-centric view of the universe is the truth? What do you mean? Right? I don't think it violates anything biblical to say that the Earth orbits the sun. At the same time, I think God does give a special attention to the Earth. Have you all ever seen a depiction of our solar system? Like a picture of it? Maybe on a poster in your classroom or a graphic on, whatever. And you get the sun in the middle, it's real big, and then you get these like flat loops around it and the different planets at different distances. They're all wrong. Like, they're all really wrong. The planets don't orbit in like a concentric flat, like they don't all orbit on the same plane particularly. And the scale of the sun is completely wrong in every one of those depictions. Because if it wasn't wrong, the model would be it would be at an unusable scale. How many of you have ever seen a depiction of an atom where you get a bunch of like balls in the middle and you get the balls on the outside? Also wrong. That is not what atoms look like. The big problem, of course, being electrons. Electrons are nowhere near the size of a proton, but worse than that, they're not even in one place at the same time necessarily. And they don't orbit, they live in probabilistic shells. You know what the problem with that is? That's really hard to draw. And it's really hard to picture. Is the model of the atom that you received in high school, or maybe junior high, is that wrong? With higher understanding, you would update the model, but what you received isn't wrong. It's not untrue. But it was delivered to you in a way that helps you understand up to your capacity. Does that make sense? Okay. So we're going to read some things in here that make it sound like everything rotates around the Earth, or that, everything is roughly in, small and the Earth is big, or whatever. Just bear in mind that the story is as if a parent is kneeling down next to a small child, trying to explain the story in a way that they can wrap their head around. What's more, and I can't emphasize this enough, we talk about the importance of knowing genre in interpreting a book, right? We've talked about that in like every class I've taught, right? I would love to see somebody nod. Okay, great. Is Genesis chapter 1 and 2 meant to be a science textbook? It's not the intention with which it was written, okay? So, where did the water come from? Is it actual water? I don't know. Like, what do I make of this? Maybe. But the way the narrative is told, verse 3 is the first thing he creates. And this will raise more questions for us. Verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Where did the light come from? I don't mean who created it, but like, what's the light source? Light travels, right? So what's the light source? It's not the sun. God hasn't made the sun yet. He won't make that until day 4. Great big candle. I would suggest maybe if revelation is a key to helping us understand this, the light source probably is God. Just glowing onto his creation. Or maybe he just created the concept of light. But then let's keep going a little bit and then we'll backtrack. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. He called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. The science geek in me really likes the idea that light was the first thing he made, because light has some really special properties. If there are any other science geeks in the room, what's one special property of light that you can think of off the top of your head? It reflects? Okay, good. What else? Something that's true of light that's not really true of other things. Well, not necessarily. Like, these lights are not nearly as warm as incandescents, but light in the first place is about the fastest thing we know of. We don't know of anything that travels faster than light. It seems to be the upper bound of speed in our universe. It's pretty cool. It exhibits the qualities of both a particle and a wave. What's light made of? We say photons like that's an answer. We don't know, right? In some ways it acts like something, and some ways it acts like nothing. It's more like movement than it is a thing. It's bizarre. And we take it for granted all the time. We just use light all the time for everything. But so God makes light, and then he says sometimes light and sometimes not. So we'll call the light day, we'll call the dark night. When he made light and dark, well, I think we can say this safely. Dark existed before light. We can agree with that, right? Because darkness is the absence of light. Dark doesn't have an assertive existence. It doesn't exist apart from the idea of light. If light was not an idea, darkness wouldn't be a thing. The inverse is not true, right? Light, we can say, is a thing, and then darkness is just when that thing's not present. That matters later on in some theological metaphors about light and dark. But today, in our story, as God creates the light, and he turns it on and off at various times, and he has day and night, which is the good one and which is the bad one? They're both good. That's right, they're both good. We associate darkness with bad because it's also associated, especially in the ancient world, but even today, it's associated with danger, right? We have lights in our parking lot on a timer to ensure that if you come on our property, you will not be in the dark. Because people do nefarious things in the dark, or at the very least, you can stumble and hurt yourself, and we don't want that, right? But if danger wasn't an issue, then darkness no longer has a negative feeling to it. Well, that's the thing, right? And that's sort of the contrast. And in our world of electric lights and shift work and all that kind of stuff, where we've disrupted our human rhythms completely, we forget that the way it used to be is when the sun's up, you can work, and when the sun goes down, you rest. And it's sort of like, it's almost as if God is saying, you're done, clock out. You know what I mean? We just don't operate like that anymore, so we kind of lose some of that meaning. How long is a day? How long is a day? 24 hours, right? Why? Why is a day 24 hours? Well, okay, so let's just imagine you don't have a clock handy. How do you mark the beginning of a day? Sun comes up, and how do you mark the beginning of the next day? Sun comes up again. So our understanding of day has everything to do with the rotation of the earth relative to its position with the sun, right? Did I mention that the sun hasn't been made yet? Interesting. So because I said I would try and offer a variety of opinions, I'll introduce this one now, and we'll continue. We'll put a pin in it, and we'll come back to it later in a deeper way. But there are folks who say that the best way to understand what's happening in Genesis is not a literal 6-day creation in the way that we think of days. They would say that the word day does not mean a 24-hour period. Often that move is made to make room for the millions and or billions of years that a secular cosmological Big Bang and evolutionary timeline demand. And whether or not that's valid, I'm not touching at the moment. We will come back to that later. But I do find that this bears for some consideration. Did God use a 24-hour time span, which we mark because it's how fast the earth is spinning, for the rising and setting of the sun? Did God do that before he made a sun to be relative to? I'm not saying no, and I'm not saying yes. But I bet you've never thought about that before. Let's go a little farther. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." That on its own might not mean much to you right now, so let's read a little bit more. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse, and it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. Okay, so what is created on the second day? Yeah, so the word in my Bible says heaven, right? But it's not what I usually think of theologically as heaven. Yeah, I would usually say sky. Now, it's worth noting in ancient languages like Hebrew that this was written in, and also Greek, believe it or not, the word heaven and the word sky are the same word. We feel a need for more precision about this because airplanes and rocket ships, can you get in a rocket ship and arrive at the throne of God? No. He said if it blows up or something. You can't chart a path there. I'll put it this way. Because the way we conceive of the universe is differently shaped than the way the ancient world did. So we have a need to separate the idea of heaven and sky in a way that ancient people didn't need to separate those things. When I ask you point toward heaven, do it. We all point up. And someone in Australia would be pointing also up in the opposite direction. So when we conceive of heaven, we do so in a very abstract way that's different than how the ancient people would have. I do think up for heaven and down for hell is really good for a couple of reasons. In fact, I think I preached on this a few years ago, but as we go deeper and deeper into the earth, if you're making, shells, as you get deeper and deeper into the earth, what's happening? Yeah, but it's also getting smaller and smaller and smaller, right? And yeah, moving toward destruction, right? Like the deeper you get in the earth, the more like you're toast. Like eventually we believe, and we don't know because we haven't been there, but we believe that the earth is so hot in the center that it's got a superheated iron core that's beyond molten. It's wild down there. But smallness and destruction, right? You're moving in the direction of vanishingly small. But if we point up and we keep drawing the spheres, what happens? Greater and greater and greater. And if you think principally that the direction of holiness and light and God is up, we think about ascendance, it's moving toward the greater and greater and greater. And as we think about descending into hell, smaller and smaller and into destruction. Right? I still like up and down. Now that all breaks apart like if you're in space and you're doing a spacewalk at the International Space Station and I say, could you please point down? Do you point at the space station? Or do you point at the Earth? You know, but it doesn't, that's not the concern of this book. So, I just want you to understand, like, even if ancient people thought God lived in the sky, that doesn't mean that we have an unsophisticated or wrong faith. It just means that we have to update our models of understanding. But does it make the words less true that we understand things about the universe that they didn't back then? I don't think it does. So he made the sky. And he separated the water below from the water above. What water above? Maybe clouds. Could be clouds. There's a weird quirk in Genesis that I'll be spoiling a few weeks ahead right now by telling you, but I will tell you. There is an easy reading of Genesis that suggests that it never rained before the Great Flood. I don't know if that's true. I don't think it's an airtight case. But it could be true. So if the waters above were like, we have no problem of picturing an ozone layer, right? What if there was water suspended up there? We can't put it back up there, you know. But does that mean it couldn't have been that way? Maybe it was. I don't know. If it was, then it makes some things in the flood story stand out even more conspicuously. But I'm not going to stake my reputation, and certainly not my salvation, on the question of whether or not there was a shell of water around the earth. I don't know. You know? But that's kind of the way it's written. So maybe let's just hold that loosely. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, just hang on to that for now. Let's save that for when we get into the flood. Yeah. All right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sometimes like nebula and so forth can look like clouds or pools up there as well. All right, moving on. Verse 9. God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and then let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Now, as you picture this, and as it's described here, it sounds as if God is pulling the waters in. And that's kind of the language used. That may not be a bad way to picture it. The way that it makes sense for me would be more like the land is coming up, or maybe that the water is going down, right? And that's kind of what we see in the flood, right? After the flood, The waters cover the mountains, and then as they recede, But it's going to, if you were watching it happen, it sure would look like the water was shrinking down and gathering together. But there's more. So God made the sky on day 2, but on day 3 he makes the dry land. Verse 11, and God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. So this is the first life that God makes. And if you are looking to square the creation account, to harmonize a creation account with an evolutionary account, this would make you feel good. We would expect to see vegetation before we'd see sea creatures and land creatures and things of that nature. It doesn't solve all of our problems yet. Because remember, all the plants sprouted up, there's still no sun. Now you could picture it as, well, I guess in the evolutionary account, for millions and millions of years, God was just turning the nightlight on and off, right? Shining and not shining in turn. And yeah, maybe. There is something kind of beautiful to that idea, right? That God himself shines on the planet to make the plants grow. But things aren't going to so neatly harmonize with the evolutionary account as people might like. So the other thing that I will suggest to you, and this is an important part of the conversation, it says that God made all the plants each in their own kind. You got trees bearing fruit that has seeds, and there's other vegetation that have their own seeds. Everything has their own seeds. And so first off, what's implicit in that? What is the purpose of a seed in a plant? What's that? Yeah, propagation, right? From the one plant comes more plants. That's cool. So there's multiplication baked in already. And when we get to talking about creatures, we'll see that God even commands them to multiply. But the sticking point in this conversation for many Christians is, well, what does it mean in their own kinds he made them? Or by what process does he make them in their own kinds? I don't know that this is the moment to talk about survival of the fittest. I don't think so. I think I'm going to hold off on that for a little. I'm going to hold off on that at least until we get to day 6. But some will say, well, he made every flower by his own design. He made every vegetable by his own design. He made every tree by his own design. When he made it, all that ever would be were there. Personally, I think that claim is an overreach. Others would say, well, through a process of generational mutation, God made all the plants that would be from the one plant that he made originally, or something like that. I think that too is also probably an overreach. So I can promise you this. God didn't make chihuahuas. That doesn't mean your chihuahua isn't great, or that God doesn't love your chihuahua. People made chihuahuas out of animals that existed. Like if you go far enough back, your chihuahua was a wolf, and God forgive us for making chihuahuas out of wolves, right? But like we have enough human history to track doing that. So I would go so far as to say today, for our purposes today, because I'm going to wrap here in about 5 minutes, so I don't want to open a can of worms that I can't fish with. I don't think being faithful to the Word of God means you believe that new species can't arise over time. I think that is taking it too far. You'll hear people talk about microevolution and macroevolution and all that sort of stuff, and I think that those might be worthwhile designations, but you can already hear they sort of have a fuzzy line implicit in them already. So what I want to help, maybe next week we'll spend some time on this, I want to help develop for you a toolkit to sort of decide, well, what does square with my belief? What has theological consequence? I think that's part of what's important. And you guys aren't like professional theologians, so maybe y'all don't think in these terms, but for me, the theological consequences of my belief are the most important. And so I feel that way on your behalf as well, right? But I don't, hopefully you're getting the idea here, I don't want to be people who are so closed that we try to put on God's word things that aren't there either, right? So I've got 3 minutes left in the class, probably. Do you think I should wrap up? I think so too. So let's just end with this thought. He has for 3 days now made something, looked at it, and said it's good. That goodness really does matter. When God says something is good, I want you to understand he's not giving his opinion. Never thought this thought before. I want to be careful as I introduce it in public, but I don't think God has opinions. Yeah. Just the things that God thinks, those are what's true, right? We can have opinions, right? What's up? That's my opinion, at least. Yeah. So when God looks at his creation and says it is good, or thinks to himself that it is good, it really is. I mean, that's not just like a pat on the back for a job well done. He's looking at it and saying ontologically, in its very existence, it is positive that this thing, it is a positive impact on the universe that this has come to be. Slight spoilers for next week. He'll even say that about people. In fact, he'll go even farther with people. So, I say that because there is an environmentalist strain out there that thinks that people are the worst thing that happened to the planet, and I'm sorry, you're wrong. But anyways, let's wrap there for today. I hope this was an interesting discussion. We will get, things will get more narrative as we get farther in, and I will be less, I don't know. If what we did today isn't your jam, that's okay. Just hang with me for a couple weeks, and then we'll move into something that'll feel a little different. But I think for some of y'all, you do have an itch to think about and talk about some of this stuff. So this will be an opportunity for us to do that. So looking forward to wrapping up Creation Part 1 next week, most likely. And then, God willing, we'll do Chapter 2 the following week. 11 minutes till church. Go freshen up your coffee and come on back. Frank, you can prop the doors, please.